Blog Talk Radio. Good day to all. Thank you for tuning in to the Uvisualeyes show, where you will experience the top, most powerful, insightful, and talented teachers, speakers, and writers on inner wisdom, personal evolution, and love. Here you will have the opportunity to learn how to create or manifest the life experience you prefer. This is your host and life transformation coach, Michelle Kraft. Welcome. If you missed the last show with Deborah King featuring her new book, How to Be Your Own Shaman, you will find the show in the archives and can listen at your leisure. The Uvisualeyes show is becoming a more exciting experience every week. Every time I turn around, there's yet another amazing healer, teacher, or shaman as my guest here, sharing their amazing insights. And now, as we started just weeks ago broadcasting from Paris, it's becoming a much more stimulating and evocative experience. Today on the Uvisualeyes show, we will be talking about nature of time, space, and matter, essentially quantum physics. And we have one of the top authorities on the subject of quantum physics, Fred Alan Wolf. He is a physicist, writer, and lecturer who earned his PhD in theoretical physics at UCLA in 1963. He continues to write and lecture throughout the world and conduct research on the relationship of quantum physics to consciousness. He is the National Book Award-winning author of Taking the Quantum Leap. Dr. Wolf has taught at the University of London and the University of Paris, where we're broadcasting today. His work in quantum physics and consciousness is well known through his popular and scientific writing. He is the author of 11 books, and in his most recent book, he seems to bridge the spiritual and the rational quite well. Join me in welcoming the author of the fabulous new book, Time Loops and Space Twists, How God Created the Universe. Welcome to the Uvisualeyes show, Dr. Wolf, again.
Thank you, Michelle. Pleasure to be back with you this evening.
So here we are, kind of a second half, a second segment of sorts, and I'm sure that there's probably many listeners that weren't on last time, so I'm sure we'll overlap and do a little review. But I want to start with, of course, which most interviews do start with, what was your inspiration for writing Time Loops and Space Twist?
Well, there were a couple of things that were on my mind at the time when I began doing this book. One was that as a writer and a physicist who is no longer in a regular academic environment, I began to get more curious about what is going on in the field of my endeavor, my choice, the thing I wanted to get involved in, physics. And so I began researching what is called quantum field theory. This isn't a field I normally would research because it was my main interest was quantum physics as it applied to consciousness, and I didn't think one needed quantum field theory to answer some of those questions. But I turned out to be wrong, especially as I began to probe more deeply into this thing called quantum field theory. Quantum field theory is to quantum physics, in a way, almost as much of a gap as the or as the gap between quantum physics and what we call classical physics. So they're widely separated fields, and it takes a little while to get used to what the difference is, especially when you're still sinking your teeth into what is quantum physics in the first place. And so I decided to go deeply into a study of it, and I began to make some interesting discoveries. And those discoveries led to my writing this book. My way of dealing with learning anything is I teach it. This is an old saw, but it's something that everybody who's in the teaching mode actually knows. You learn more by teaching the subject than you do by listening to somebody else explain it. So, right. But you read what other people explain in order to get you inspired enough to learn enough to start teaching it. So that's how the word gets spread. I mean, I think we teach and learn, and they're really more or less the same thing. So
definitely.
This is what inspired me. I just found some fascinating discoveries, and I thought, gosh, if I can explain it to the lay audience, the audiences I normally deal with in my writings, then that means I've got a better understanding of what I'm talking about, and that means that I've accomplished my goal.
Right. So, I mean, the big question would be for most people, what is quantum physics? I know that many people may not truly understand what it is. I mean, in conversations I've witnessed about quantum physics, many just kind of smile and their eyes kind of glaze over. So, and you talk about making it simple for those people, the layperson. So, in that kind of simple way, what is quantum physics so that we can understand it, on that level?
Well, I think it might be of interest to take an historical view of what we call quantum physics. And in order to do so, we really have to go back on more than 2,000 years because we're looking at the history of early thought. And this really takes us into what we would call today ancient Greece. And we're looking at a dialogue that might have taken place between Plato and one of his rather well-known students called Aristotle. And their dialogue indicated already that a split or a new way of seeing was being born. The Greeks were interested in rational thought. They wanted to, as far as they were concerned, everything could be explained rationally, which meant that there was a logical way of proceeding through explanation so that another person could, in a sense, objectively carry out procedures to determine whether or not that explanation was right or wrong. If somebody tells you that when I take a ball and let go of it, it's going to rise up to the ceiling, everybody would say, well, that can't be right because when I do the experiment, I drop the ball or I let go of the ball, it falls to the floor. So everybody would say that the idea of rising to the ceiling must be not a rational or not a logical or it doesn't work that way thought. So when we begin with the Greeks and we look at what they came up with, Plato had this vision, and in his vision there was a field out there. He didn't use the term field. I'm paraphrasing here. There was a field out there, an ideal field, a field of idealism. There was, for example, he could say in his mind, I can imagine a table, a perfect table. But when I go to build that table, it never is perfect. It wobbles a little bit. It's not exactly quite the same way the wood has a little bit of texture defects in it. But in my mind, the ideal table exists. And so for Plato, there was an ideal world that he saw as being, quote unquote, real. It was part of reality. But it wasn't a reality he could ever reach. Whatever he did, he would always, in some sense, produce an uncertainty, an indeterminism, something that could not be accounted for in the building of whatever it was he had in mind from the ideal. For Aristotle, there was no ideal. There was just tables that you built. And that whether they came out that way or this way was due to human errors or whatever. But they were very different practical versus you might say, mysterious or mystical kinds of thinking. And Plato was, in this sense, more of a mystic. Pythagoras was also in that school, and he also was a kind of a mystic, and he thought, there is the ideal mathematical, musical relation to the whole universe. So you see there was this splitting already between ideal thinking and practical thinking that was going on. And that split still exists today in the world of science that we know. world that we know, the world that we sense with our everyday senses, seems to be more in the practical side. We want to know what happens if you do this. Well, that will happen. Well, what's cause? What's effect? If I push on the gas pedal of my car, the car will lurch forward. If I put my foot on the brake, it'll. Very logical, rational, mechanical kinds of thinking. And but because of the Platonic ideal, we always wondered, well, what would happen if we go deeper, further, smaller, larger? If we start to figure out ways to go deeper, further, or larger, smaller, we begin to peer into worlds in which the logical, rational thought that applied to the big world doesn't work anymore. And one of those worlds that we peered into back in the turn of the 20th century was something we call the atomic world, the world that was well below our normal sense of vision. We don't see atoms with our eyes. We need special instruments to do so. And when we started to apply the laws that we saw applied to automobiles and baseballs and things of large scale to this small atomic world, the laws simply didn't work. And what seemed to work is something that later was called quantum mechanics, and later was called quantum physics, as being almost the same thing. The word quantum, the first time it came in, was because when people began to study light around the turn of the 20th century, they began to see that light itself, which was thought to be wavy and continuously distributed as it waved through space, turn out to arrive at destinations as little tiny lumps. And the term lump then, because the word quantum means a whole amount of something, there were whole amounts of light arising, so they call those quanta of light, from which the word photon later arose. But anyway, the word quanta was part of the thinking, so the word quantum physics arose from that basic fact that when they began to look at light on such a small scale as like on size of atoms or whatever, they began to see it was lumpy, it was not continuous. And this then led to this picture we now call quantum physics. So basically, quantum physics, in a nutshell, is the physics that one needs to use in order to understand what happens on the atomic and now subatomic and even now subnuclear levels of existence.
Oh, I never even knew that the definition of quantum. That's extremely interesting to me. I heard, in a recent interview, that you state that people need to stop thinking about their material needs so much. And, of course, many might quickly balk in defense over this. But if we are to believe that God, like we have heard many times, provides for our needs, that we don't need to worry about those so much, then what do you think we should think about? What would be a more of a beneficial focus other than the material?
First, I need to qualify. When I say stop thinking about material needs, I don't mean totally stop thinking about material needs.
Yes.
After all, you've got to sleep, you've got to eat, you've got to breathe.
Right.
You have to clothe yourself. You need to most likely earn some kind of subsistence so that you could live, because we are material beings after all. So I don't mean we totally stop concerning ourselves with material goods. They're very important. In fact, our whole basis of trade and our basis of economy is based upon the supplying of goods and services to each other so that we can live with material support. But my concern was not so much that we stop it, but that we consider that there is another way of seeing oneself, so that the material goods don't become necessarily the primary or the only thing we think about, but something else as well. And that something else as well is what leads one, as I began this conversation with you, begins to lead one into the Platonic viewpoint. What about an ideal? What about something better than what it is right now? The ideal table rather than the table that we have to live with.